Welcome to Brighter Rays this week. Today's study is called Love and Judgment. We're looking at 1 John 4, 17 through 21. Now, John has explained to us several different ways the necessity of love for God and for our love for brothers and sisters in Christ. And he has explained that in several different ways. In this text, he will make it clear that both are a necessity in our lives, not only for the present, but also for the future. You know, it never fails that when something bad happens in the world, that false teachers increase their attacks. They always use a tragedy or a political season or something like that to, make that a point of their false teaching. And it's really a pattern or the marching orders from Satan that they always follow. Using fear is a key tactic. You know, when this tragedy occurs, then they capitalize on it. When a major political event takes place, they're quick to chime in. And you see that, which is very interesting, because a lot of the false teachers claim to be prophets, but yet they didn't foresee things like COVID and, like the BLM riots. God didn't tell them about that. But they'll still carry that false teaching around with them. People still give them money and follow them. So that's a problem. But that is a common strategy amongst false teachers, because in the end, false teachers, they want power, they want money. That's the main things that they want. So you see, when a tragedy happens, it's easy to take that and then to exploit it. You also notice, if you look at a lot of the false teaching, it centers in on end times and prophecy. It's nothing new. It's been a tried and true method of gaining followers. Jesus talked about it. Paul and Peter warned about it. They use fear and intimidation in connection to the end times to stir people up emotionally. They sprinkle in a few Bible verses, and then they ask for your money. Yeah, okay. The Lord's coming. You got to do all this stuff. You got to be afraid. And this is how most of the cults have been birthed, and how many televangelists work today. They try to get you to give them money because, the Lord's coming back. And so you need to give money now. But we who are true followers of Christ, do we have anything to fear? Regardless of your view of the millennium, your post-mill, all-mill, pre-mill, dispensationalist, covenantal, whatever, do we have any reason to fear the return of Jesus Christ? If you look at all those different systems of belief, they all teach that, no, you don't have to be afraid of the return of Christ. No matter what view you take, if you're saved, you're safe. You don't have to be afraid of Christ coming back. And this is what we find John arguing in a passage today. It's unfortunate a lot of teachers, a lot of Christian teachers, use fear when it comes to the return of Christ. And when they're talking about the end times, it's always, fear. Oh, this bad stuff's going to happen. Oh, it's going to get, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And that might be the case, but there's no reason to fear that. It's not a reason to be afraid, but they often forget that part very conveniently, that, even if it gets worse, even if everything else falls apart around us, we don't have a reason to be afraid. It's not, we shouldn't be fearful of that happening, even if it does. Even if, the apocalypse happens, you got zombie apocalypse happening, you still don't have to be afraid. And that's what the teaching of 1 John is, that there really is no fear as you follow Christ, because fear has to do with punishment. So John will also return to the idea of loving the church here in this little section. For Christians, then, we cannot dare not separate the love of God and the love of the church people. And now notice I said the church people, because I think a lot of people get this confused. They love the idea of church. They like going to church. They like the songs of the church. They like the programs of the church. They like the church building that they go to. They like all these things surrounding the church, but they don't really love the church, which is the people. The people are the church, not all the other things that go and happen around the church, or the things that the church does. The things that the church does is not the church itself. We can't confuse like a worship service with the church, because the church is the people, not how they do a worship service. But people, I love that. Wow. Where'd you go to church today? Oh, yeah, I went to church today. Well, what'd you like about it? Well, I love the way they did this, this, and this. Like, well, that's not okay, but that's not loving the church. That's just loving what the church does. But, the world can love what the church does too, as long as it benefits them, as long as they're getting something out of it. But that's really the answer you get from a lot of people that go to church these days. It's like, well, I got this, this, and this out of it. I like this, this, and this about it, about the worship service. It's not about the people. Like, I go there because I've committed myself. What do you love about that church? Well, I love the people, and I've committed myself to loving them no matter what. I mean, that really should be the Christian answer. But we say all these other things. Well, I like the kids program. I like the youth program. Okay, thanks, but that doesn't mean you love the church. Doesn't mean you're a Christian. If you said, well, I love the people there and I've committed myself, I'm sacrificing, I'm giving of my time, my money, my efforts, my prayers, I'm denying myself and my desires for these people, then I would say, okay, cool, yeah, you love that church. But if you're just saying, well, I love that church because I like the way they sing these songs, or I like the songs that they sing in the worship service, I like this, mom's program that they have, it's like, okay, anyone can love that. You don't have to be a Christian to love those things. You might just like the social part of it. You might just like the creative part. You might just like, the things that the church does. So we have to make sure we don't get caught up in that trap of that, because that's really a false teaching, that you can love all the things about the church but not actually love the church people. And we'll get into that a little bit later on in the second part of our study, and talk a little bit more about that. Because that's a problem. It's a big problem. People can easily leave churches and move around churches, or they feel like they need to leave a church because they don't like the worship service. Well, okay, but do you love the people? Well, yeah, sure, I love the people, but I don't like the service, so I'm leaving. Like, well, that doesn't really follow, because if you love that person, love never ends. Love is not self-seeking. So how do you put that together with what you're doing? I don't see it. And then people get angry because they're like, well, you can't make me tell you that. I don't have to have a reason. Well, yeah, you should. You better. Otherwise, you're just tipping your hand that you don't really love the church people, which means, according to John here, that you don't love God. So that's something we need to, not that we go around and want to bash people with it, but it's true. It's the truth. And we need to stand with the truth. And maybe it hurts, but okay, then let's look at that. Not be like what James says and be someone who looks in the mirror and then walks away and forget what you look like. You gotta look at it and like, okay, I need to change. I need to be different. But so the love that John's going to talk about here, and really the love that he's been talking about all along when it comes to church, he talks about loving the brothers. He doesn't use the word church. He talks about loving the brothers, and that's important because he's talking about loving people, not the idea of church or whatever. And we don't want to confuse that. So John says if you don't love the individuals who go to a church, then you don't love. It's not love. And if you don't love the church people, you don't love God. You're lost. And you should really be afraid of the return of Christ because you're lost. And you will spend eternity apart from him. So that's our introduction for our study. Come back next time and we'll begin to look at verses 17 through 19 and the necessity of the love of God.